All right. Welcome, 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 welcome. Come on in. Good morning. Just a reminder to mute you guys' audios. There we are. Come on in, come on in. Everyone, please let us start with bringing those cool hands together. We're going to wait for everyone to join. All right. And you guys already know what's about to happen. I can tell by those big, beautiful smiles on your face that we get to welcome one of the most honorable, prestigious guests you'll likely ever get to learn from. What to speak of this training, but in any training or any aspect of life. And that is His Holiness Sri Dayananda Das Goswami Maharaj, who we've been studying from for months now, at least, some of us certainly longer. And we've done extensive introductions to Maharaj, but you know that he is a PhD. He is an author. He has been practicing and teaching bhakti for over half a century now. And I mean, we've gone on and on and on about all of his amazing qualifications, but the proof of the pudding certainly in the tasting. And get ready, because you guys are going to get stuffed today with unbelievably life-changing and remarkable experience learning from Maharaj. Please give your full rapt attention and if you've ever taken notes, this is the time to do it. And just get ready, and please ask your questions with your full enthusiasm that you guys have been bringing with the sessions before today. And without further ado, I'm just trying to make it as short as I can so they don't have to listen to me and they can do what they've wanted to do, is not listen to you, Maharaj. So please take it away.
Thank you. No pressure. So thank you all very much for coming. It's a pleasure for me to get a chance to spend some time with you. And I thought I would talk a little bit about the word bhakti itself, which of course is a Sanskrit word. And it's interesting because I was asked to speak a bit about sharing bhakti, and the word bhakti itself means sharing. So I'm going to go into that. The word bhakti comes from a Sanskrit root. Sanskrit is the way it's been analyzed for many, many thousands of years. And actually, I'll just mention that the modern academic field of linguistics began when European scholars discovered ancient Sanskrit grammar. So in fact, the word Sanskrita, you may know the word Sanskara, which means different things. And of course, one of the main meanings of Sanskara is a ceremony or some kind of rite that's performed to purify one's existence. And these are often called in the West rites of passage. For example, there's a Garbhadhan Sanskara, that when a man and a woman want to beget a child, they perform these sacred processes to bring a very special child into their lives. So that's called Garbhadhan Sanskara. And then there's, of course, school, graduation, marriage, funeral ceremonies, and so on. But anyway, so those are called sanskaras. It also means, and of course, in the Yoga Sutras, it means deep psychological impressions. But so in the sense of something which really refines and purifies and elevates, Sanskrita is actually the same word as sanskara in a different form. It means a highly refined language. And so in that language, there are these roots which grow organically into words, verbs and nouns and so on. So bhakti comes from a root, which is budge, pronounced for better, just like the English word budge, like don't budge an inch. So that's exactly how you pronounce it. And so when you add a feminine ending, ti, which is a very common feminine ending in Sanskrit, it's a gendered language. So you have words like shruti and smriti and bhakti and so on. Then you get the word bhakti. And so it comes from the root budge. And then, of course, if you form a neuter noun with a common ending anam, you get the word bhajan or bhajanam. So the word bhajanam, and not a lot of Western people say bhajanam, which actually means container. But devotion is actually bhajanam. So bhajanam and bhakti are really from the same root, interestingly. And so let's look at what that means. So I'm going to read to you from the standard Sanskrit dictionary done in Oxford over 100 years ago by Monier Williams. So bhajana, bhaj, the root bhaj can mean to divide. Because if you think to a lot or a portion, to share, because when you share something, whatever you have, you divide it and you give something to someone you care about for whatever reason. And so therefore the word bhakti also means sharing, and ultimately in the highest sense, bhakti means sharing yourself at a very deep level. In fact, you may be interested to know a very common way in ancient Vedic culture that people pop the question, what if a man was proposing to a woman, like a very common way to say, will you marry me? It's interesting because if 200 years ago in England, I'm a big Jane Austen fan, the man would often say, please make me the happiest man in the world. And then the woman, to confide in her, relatives and friends that, yes, he finally proposed, she would say, yes, I'm the happiest woman in the world. So it's interesting that in different cultures, there are different ways of sort of navigating this very intimate question. And so in Sanskrit, typically they'll say, bhajaswa mang bhajantam twam, which means sort of like, please share your, please adore me as I am adoring you. And so to adore, to worship, bhajaswa mang bhajantam twam, that I am accepting you. I want to share my life with you, so please share your life with me. And so that's a typical way of asking someone to marry you in Sanskrit. Another way, I just want to give you a few contexts of how this word is used, because it's a very rich word. And when you say bhakti, if you really know the language, it means all these things. And so Krishna uses the word in a very interesting and sort of unexpected way in the Gita, where he says, actually, I'll give you the verse number. That's verse 411. Verse 411 in the Gita, Krishna says, Ye jata mam prapadyante, as all people approach me, tang stataiva bhajami aham, I budge them exactly in that way. That's, of course, he used the word, the Sanskrit verb, that tang stataiva bhajami aham. So it's a very interesting verse because it's actually not possible. Here's a double negative coming. It's actually not possible to not approach Krishna, because whatever you admire, whether it's just, let's say, a garden with beautiful flowers, I mean, those flowers are Krishna's energy. Or another person, or if you skydive and you like the sensation of, free falling through the air, not exactly age appropriate for me, but anyway, if you think about it, or if you like another person, whatever you're attracted to, whatever you admire is actually Krishna's energy. And so actually ignoring Krishna is not really an option. In fact, Krishna says at the end of chapter 10 of the Bhagavad Gita, he says that jad vibhuti mat satam, whatever existence is vibhuti mat, has somehow extraordinary power, srimat, or is beautiful, urjitam, or has energy, eva va. In other words, whatever is extraordinary or beautiful or powerful in this world, tatadeva, which means in Sanskrit literally, like in each and every case, tatadeva avagachatvam. You should understand that in every case, that is mama tejo angsa sambhavam, that object that has attracted you, that inspires you, that impresses you is an angsha. It's just a part of my splendor. So therefore, even the atheist, the power of speech, which allows someone to assert atheism, it's a gift from God. Because Krishna is not a jealous God. Krishna, the wonderful thing about Krishna, he's a God that does not need a single 12-step program, for jealousy, for anger. And so Krishna says that everyone is approaching me, but in different ways. Some people to exploit me, because if we want to exploit nature or exploit other people, then we're trying to exploit the energy of God, which of course is not really possible, and therefore we end up getting entangled. It's like the tar baby, because you can't really exploit God. So getting back to the word budge, so Krishna says, as everyone approaches me, and he uses the verb budge precisely in that way, which in this case would mean, with the extra words precisely, it means I reciprocate. So Krishna is not a jealous God. He simply reciprocates, which is a very healthy way, by the way, to deal with other people. And so he reciprocates with us. And yet he uses this verb budge. So I accept you. I share myself with you as you approach me. And so this is the word budge, the verb. And then, of course, in the word bhakti, it can mean, from the Sanskrit dictionary, in the special case in which it's especially relevant to us, let's see, to resort to something, to approach, to devote oneself to. It also means to devote oneself to. And of course, the word bhakti itself, apart from the verb, the word bhakti itself can mean attachment, devotion, fondness for, devotion to, trust, homage, worship, piety, faith, love, devotion, and so on. So that's bhakti in a sort of a very large nutshell, a large nut. But so then the question is, how do you share bhakti? And so I thought I like to go to the root of things. So what does it mean to share in general? Because it's a simple English word. We all assume we know what the word share means. Like if, you have a box of chocolate and someone says, could you share that with me? We know what those English words mean. But so just looking at the English dictionary, the word share, to share something, it can be to give a portion of something to another, to share. And so what does it mean to share bhakti with other people? And the word bhakti can mean sharing. Sharing, effective sharing, not getting someone for their birthday something that they just, they cannot get to the store fast enough to return it. So really sharing something that people actually want, it requires empathy. Some people attempt to share, themselves with others, but it comes off all wrong. And so you can't really effectively share unless you know somebody, or at least something about them. And there should be empathy and sympathy. And you have to understand that person and find a language that communicates with them. So, because sometimes attempts to share can feel threatening to the other person. Sometimes it can seem unwanted, like, I didn't really give you permission to, it's like an unwanted intimacy, or you're presuming you know me. And so sharing really requires a serious interest in the other person. And because those who practice bhakti yoga, I mean, I've seen people who, they love everyone, but only as a theological category, like everyone is a spirit soul and everyone is an eternal being. So, I love you as a theological category, but I don't actually like you very much. And so sharing really means that you don't simply like, okay, let's go save the fallen souls. I remember in the old days when we used to make American airports much more pleasant by harassing people and trying to relieve them of any excess money they might have in their pockets. That was sort of, weighing them down. And so the idea was, we weren't, we were young, and I guess young people have sort of a legitimate right to be a little crazy. I know I certainly was. So you can really love people. You can love people as sort of conceptually or philosophically, but you don't really love that person. And so I think for sharing, the more you really love people, and of course it helps to love yourself. I mean, that's, of course, I mean, loving yourself too much leads to that sublime state called clinical narcissism. And I mean, there's a sense in which I think we now live on planet, narcissism or something, but which is a natural result of, frankly, of sort of crass capitalism that always tries to sell things to you by flattering you. So everyone lives in an environment of saturation, false flattery. Like, you're beautiful, you're perfect, you're wonderful, and therefore this product is for you. So really caring about people, and if you love yourself, and because how do you love yourself? How do you believe in yourself without falling into vanity or false pride, which, as some religions say, is a deadly sin? So, what does it mean? How can you really embrace yourself, feel great about yourself, and yet not become vain and proud? And I think there's a very simple answer, and that is we have to see ourselves through Krishna's eyes. Because Krishna loves us infinitely. In fact, as I sometimes would say, Krishna's in our heart. There's actually nothing you can do to get him out of your heart. Like, sometimes, let's say you don't want someone in your life, and so you're just going to kind of, what's that term now? I never quite understood it. Ghosting or something. So it's one of those things you hear nowadays. It's a new addition to the lexicon. So there's certain things we can do when we're trying to get rid of people or to make them understand, no, you're not wanted here. And so, anyway, but Krishna, you can't get rid of Krishna, which some people may find, terrible. But I mean, Krishna loves us. So it's like if you have really loving parents. When I was young, I mean, when I think back of what I put my parents through, I never had kids, which was lucky because I had too much bad karma. I had too much, for what I did to my parents. But I mean, I wasn't really an evil person, but and I had really good parents. I was very fortunate. I received a lot of love when I was growing up. And so even though I did really bizarre things like joining, an Eastern movement and so on, but, ultimately they were always there. And so Krishna is the supreme loving parent. So you can't get him out of your heart. He doesn't want to impose on you. So if someone really wants to get rid of Krishna, he'll just, what Kunti Devi in the first canto of the Bhagavatam calls it, he'll like put this screen between you and him so you can't see him. Maya Javani Kachanam, where Kunti says, the great Queen Kunti, that you are covered by the screen of illusion. So Krishna won't impose himself on you, but he will give you forgetfulness so that you can't see him, perceive him, and you actually believe there's no God, which is like, anyway, considering the recent discoveries of microbiology, is becoming more and more delusional to think there's no designer. So, so you can't get rid of Krishna. He's always there. He's always in your heart. And he always loves you, because Krishna sees us as pure souls who just kind of, stepped in the what. And so Krishna, because he sees us at our best. He also understands, what we're up to right now, but he never forgets who we really are. I mean, imagine if you really love someone, and that person, you just have a fantastic relationship with that person. And then, as they say, God forbid, that person suffers some accident and for some time is not in their senses and says things that are, that ordinarily that person would never say. So even though that person is really acting inappropriately, but you always remember who that person really is. You remember who that person really is. And so Krishna knows who we really are. He's never faked out by our attempt to pretend that we are material bodies. And so, Krishna's never faked out by that. And so so if you see yourself through Krishna's eyes, we can see all of our faults. This modern way of talking like you're perfect just as you are. I mean, seriously? I mean, does anyone really think they're perfect the way they are? So, because if someone was really so foolish as to think that, why would you ever improve? Why would you progress? I mean, for example, when I was 12 years old, my mother bought us a piano. And so I still play, actually. That's what I do. I play actually Baroque music. I really like Handel and Bach and so on. And so I play that music. And as soon as I start playing, I completely forget that I'm a leader in a religious institution, which has probably prolonged my life. So anyway, so if I started playing and when I took up the piano again years ago, and if I thought, well, I play perfectly right now, that would have been completely stupid and delusional. And so I wasn't discouraged, I wasn't depressed. I just knew that, well, this piece is really beautiful. And the way I play it, it's just kind of, it's not there. And that's what inspired me. That didn't depress me that I'm not perfect. It inspired me to do better. So Krishna sees all of our faults, and yet at the same time, he loves us. He sees what we really are when we are ourselves perfect. And so in that way, if you see yourself through Krishna's eyes, you will love yourself without being a narcissist, without being, falling victim to false ego. And you will also see your faults, but they won't discourage you or depress you. They'll inspire you to try harder in your bhakti yoga practice. And so that same generosity that you should have with yourself. And of course, extremes. If you're too generous with yourself, it's called shamelessness. That's the technical word, being shameless. And if you're too hard on yourself, you're just injuring yourself and discouraging yourself and preventing yourself from growing. So there's really a happy balance where you see your faults, you're honest about it, but at the same time, because you believe in Krishna's mercy, not that, I'm so great, I'm so perfect, but Krishna's so great and perfect. And therefore, I know that if I just do my best, I'm going to make it. I will definitely make it. I will definitely achieve spiritual perfection. And I will have an unimaginably happy, beautiful life forever, which is, it's the best deal out there right now. So we can be very honest, see our fault, but at the same time be happy, encouraged, and enthused, inspired in our bhakti yoga practice. And then the point is, in terms of sharing, we bring that generosity to other people. Otherwise, if we're not generous with ourselves, not shameless, but kind, then it's like, well, if I'm going to suffer, you're going to suffer too. It's a typical psychology where, let's say you're living somewhere, you're going to some school where the teachers are kind of nasty and they don't let you do things. So then you can find this typical psychology where the students who are being, let's say, mistreated in some way want to make sure no one gets treated any better than they were. And so it's kind of like it becomes this vicious cycle. And well, if I couldn't do it, you can't do it either. You know, no butts in line. I had to wait in line, so you have to wait in line. And it's kind of that psychology. So if we're too hard on ourselves, we're not really going to be generous with other people. And we shouldn't be shameless. I mean, again, there's always extremes. If you're driving on the road, you can go off the road to the right or the left, as I have said a few thousand times. Sorry for all the reruns, but you know, anyway, so when you're driving, you know, if you're overcompensating and trying not to go, let's say, off the road to the right, you may end up going off the road to the left. So it's all about balance. It's all about what the Greeks called the golden mean, you know, finding that sweet spot in the middle. And that's what Krishna says. The Sanskrit word he uses is yukta, which means sort of moderate, balanced. And he says yuktahara, moderate in your eating. Don't eat too much, don't eat too little. Yuktahara viharasya, in recreation. Actually, when you practice bhakti yoga, you're supposed to have some downtime. You know, don't go too far down, but in other words, we're supposed to relax. You need time to relax. And just to, because you can't be like intense all the time. You'll burn all your wires. So Krishna says, yuktahara viharasya, in moderation, you should relax. You should have some recreation. Then yukta chestasya karmasu. And in all your actions and all your endeavors, you should be balanced. So, so that's what Krishna is asking us to do, not go to extremes, not be too intense, but just have a balanced, happy, healthy life and practice bhakti yoga. And so with other people, when we meet other people, we want to share bhakti yoga. You have to actually like people. I mean, I don't know what to say. It's, you have to, because the more we see people as souls, and of course, some people we don't approach because they're just super toxic. So if by approaching someone, it's really not going to be good for you, then just, you know, some people can only be loved from afar or philosophically. I mean, some people are only lovable philosophically. So, and actually that's one of the principles of bhakti yoga, that we, innocent people, just normal, ordinary people. Like I was out for a little japa walk and I just got into a conversation with one of my neighbors, you know, somehow or other, a little younger than me, which is very odd that there could be. Anyway, but she's a little younger than me. And so we were just talking about the fact that there are 2 semifinal NFL football games today. You know, so we somehow or other, we started talking about that. And it's, so, you know, we talked maybe 3 minutes or something, but it was really nice, friendly, you know, have a great day. Yeah, have a great day. And so it's kind of just at that point, just a little kindness, a little, you know, and so now he has a very positive attitude and just being nice, just being a nice person. So that's sharing. You care about people. And also, if you go to a doctor, I remember one time there was this Ayurvedic quack. I mean, I'm sure there are real Ayurvedic doctors, but this guy was definitely a quack. And I was in charge of Miami. This was back in the mid 80s. And we owned this 8-story building on Miami Beach, which subsequently sold, which was one of the worst real estate decisions ever made in the North American Hare Krishna movement. But anyway, I didn't do it. So he was kind of mooching off of us, and he was just living there in the building. And so he wanted to give me a treatment, an Ayurvedic treatment, for no other reason than because I was the guru there, then he could get everybody else to pay for a treatment. Yeah, you're a guru, you know, I treated your guru. So I knew what he was doing, but I didn't want to be rude. So he came in but the funny thing is that I thought, okay, how am I gonna get rid of this guy? So I'll just maybe let him give me some advice or something. So I started to tell him about some aspect of my health, maybe it could be a little better. And he actually said to me, you know, like, don't tell me, a real doctor will tell you, like, don't tell me. Since I thought, what? And so it's just like this. So in other words, it's not just, you have to kind of care about the people, and you have to get to know them a little bit. Of course, when you're talking to, like now I'm talking to a number of people, so I kind of have to just, wing it. But if you meet people individually, then, I mean, you care about people, you just find out about them, who they are, and what are their aspirations, what are their fears, what are their hopes, what are their, what is it that, what are the right buttons, what are the wrong buttons? And then it's not like a doctor that just wants to start injecting you and, and pouring medicine on you. It doesn't really know who you are. So again, if we care about people, we take a little time to get to know something about them, we like people, and we just talk, and then because Krishna is the center of reality. So wherever someone is at, there's something about Krishna consciousness which is relevant to them, which will speak to their problems, their hopes, their fears. And so, personalized service, it's like, what these airlines advertise you get in the first class compartment. And they have these commercials where they show some flight attendant just sort of smothering a passenger with attention. And so, I mean, not like that, but so that's sharing should be sincere. It should come out of genuine affection for other people. You should care enough about the person, not just as a philosophical category, you're a spirit soul, but I mean, really care about people. And so maybe I'll take a little break there. Do you have any questions? Any questions about all these topics?
And to make it easier, maybe you guys can raise your Zoom hands, just that Maharaj can take them in order, please.
Oh, Zoom hands. That's so funny. Yeah, Zoom hands. Oh, so the first Zoom hand was Banu Nandini.
Hi, Krishna Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
So good to hear you and to see you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
So I've been practicing Krishna consciousness for the past 17, 18 years. And I've been living in ashrams and, trying to do service and full time. And also I'm reaching out to many souls who are inspired by Bhakti. And I've noticed that I struggle a little bit to tell people to take to our practices, because I always feel that, just like you said, Krishna, he loves us, is in our heart, and everyone already has a relationship and a connection, a sambandha. It's already there just by the fact that we are the souls. And I really struggle to give people sadhana, because I feel almost as if I'm telling them, only when you do this will you then be able to attain the Lord, which I myself feel this path, I like that. I mean, it speaks to me a lot, but I struggle a little bit with, giving it to others. If they're not necessarily like on their own say, okay, I love chanting, can you show me how to do this? So how could you elaborate on this point between really Krishna loves us and we can feel a connection to him, and it doesn't necessarily have to come through bhakti sadhana? Well,
I kind of share your feelings, because I'm not at this point. When I was young, it was like, I was, well, you're lucky you're meeting me now. So, I mean, I was a real preacher, but I don't really do what salespeople call cold calling. I really don't like walk up to people and say, hi, can I badger you? And, or can I preach to you? Or so, even Prabhupada, if you think about it, Prabhupada had the devotees arrange public programs, and Prabhupada put a sign out. He didn't just like go out on the street and approach people. And so if someone comes to the program, if you invite people to a program and they come, in that case, it's appropriate to explain the subject matter that you advertise. I mean, don't say something like, yeah, we're gonna have a meeting about stamp collecting. And then they come, you say, actually, I'm gonna preach to you about Krishna. So in other words, so if you invite people to come to a program and you say it's about bhakti yoga, and bhakti yoga is not bait and switch, because the word bhakti yoga is actually in the Gita. I mean, Krishna himself several times uses the term bhakti yoga. And so if you invite people and they come, then it is, just in terms of good manners, it's appropriate to explain to them what bhakti yoga is. And also philosophy. Philosophy is kind of elegant in the sense that if let's say I met you, or let's say you came to one of my programs, and after I first, tried to get as many donations as I could, and then we got to the philosophical portion. I'm just joking. So let's say, for example, you were invited to a program and then you came. And so I don't think I would really bear down on you with, eye contact and, you have to surrender to Christ, not like the worst case of Sunday morning evangelical television. I think I would because philosophy is neutral ground, I would make my case. I think in a good manners, and just make the case. This is why it's actually in your rational self-interest to practice bhakti yoga. And so I think those two things already kind of moderate and soften the blow of trying to tell somebody what to do. One is you invite them and then they have a choice not to come. Or for example, book distribution. What I really like, and what many book distributors like to do, is just sit at a table. Because all kinds of people, all the major political parties, of course, that's not very promising, but anyway, major political parties and different religions, and like in universities, it could be the philosophy club, it could be the, the cricket club or something. And so when you sit at a table, it's very respectable. You're not harassing anyone. You're just putting up a sign, I'm here. If you are interested in this and you approach me, I'd be happy to tell you about it. So I would say, inviting people, or people choose to approach you. You're not forcing yourself on them. They've chosen to talk to you. And also presenting things philosophically, it's not it's not invasive. It's not trying to really take over someone's life. You're just saying that since you're interested, this is our understanding of what's ultimately in our self-interest. And on the one hand, we are all unique individuals, but at the same time, we're all one. And so we're not merely unique, we're also one. And we're not merely one, we're also unique. And so that's the oneness and difference. So I would say, if you speak to people who have sort of given you permission to talk to them, either by coming to your table or by coming to a class you're giving, or because they ask you, what are you doing? Tell me something. Somehow they know that you are special, and you are very special. You're practicing bhakti yoga. So yeah, I generally wait for people to give me permission or to indicate in some way that they actually want to hear from me. So, any other question? Yes, please.
Terrible. Thank you so much.
Hey, Leslie.
Hi. I'm so grateful that you're here and for the association of this group, and I hope I can make a coherent question. You've kind of addressed a few of my inquiries that have been ongoing. I'm a new to bhakti yoga, so as I've read through Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita as it is over and over again, I've seen, read, heard that other paths and speculation are a waste of time. And which makes me wonder, if we have millions of births working towards eternal life eventually with Lord Krishna, it's all a blip, right? So these opportunities for birth, rebirth, it feels like that's where we get to be embodied in different forms, to gain empathy, to have the equal vision, like in the grand scheme of things, it seems like it's helping. Like speculation, me coming through 25 years of other yoga to get to here is, I don't know, it feels like a blip. And because I identify as someone that tends to be hard on themselves, you mentioned that, but then at the same time, you said it's not possible to not approach Krishna. Like whatever you're attracted to is Krishna's energy. So it's like I don't know, it's a big salve. I have your book here, page 68. I have like dog-eared, and I write in my book, you guys. So it's, I don't know, am I on the right track with this?
Oh yeah, everything you're saying is very clear and intelligent.
Thank you. I guess I was looking for validation.
Oh yeah, and also I'll validate your parking ticket if you can. I mean, digitally.
Hey man, don't touch me on that.
I just remember, my age. I remember when validate became a word used not just for parking tickets, but also for. But anyway, no, what you're saying is it's very interesting. It's intelligent, and I'd be happy to respond because you're bringing up an important point. It's not at all a trivial point.
Can I tack on a few things to this? Because
oh yeah, as many as you want. Yeah,
so,
please.
I'm also a 12-stepper. So you got me there a little laugh. God doesn't need that. I tend to think really black and white. So am I in Maya or with Lord Krishna? Like, is it all or nothing? So
I would say that, just from this brief meeting, I would say you were definitely with Krishna.
Yeah, it feels alignment. I feel a lot of alignment in practice.
And your point is very well, you brought up an important point. It's very reasonable. And so I'm going to should I launch now? Okay, so I'm gonna start with what do they say? Here goes nothing. So I'm gonna begin with a little anecdote. In 1975, I think around January, February. Well, in 1974, Prabhupada called me to his room in Mayapur, India, and asked me to be in charge, the GBC as we call it, in our meta language, to be in charge of Latin America. And so I was ready for it. I was mature. I was 25 years old. That's a joke. And so when I was 25 years old, I suddenly was in charge of 20 countries. And there was no one else to do it. There was just no one else. It was a very young movement. And so I got involved in that. I forgot what I was going to say to you, but oh my God, it just slipped my mind because I was addressing your point about whoops, it's gone. But anyway, getting back to your point, and I'll probably remember it. Oh, I remember now, of course. Whew. And that was not age related. So it went really well. Krishna just showered his blessings, and there were a few little programs in Latin America. It was kind of like, in those days, being a Hare Krishna in Latin America was kind of like being on, Jupiter or something, because it was is just really off the beaten track of ISKCON. And so I went down there and things really were boomed. I mean, I kind of, in my heart, I felt we're going to open up every country, we're going to open up every major city, and it actually happened. And we printed lots of books in Spanish and Portuguese, and it was really wonderful. I mean, so many great souls down there. So many great souls came to the movement. So then in 1975, when I'd only been in my position less than a year, Prabhupada came to visit Latin America, because I was inviting him. And so he flew from LA to Mexico City, and then Mexico City to Caracas, and then Caracas back to Miami. But so I had many intimate moments with him because I was in charge. And so I fully exploited that position to, spend time with Prabhupada. So I was in his room one time, we were just there alone, and Prabhupada said something to me, which I think kind of begins to address the concerns that you expressed, Leslie. And that is, I was sitting next to him, he was sitting behind his little low desk, and Prabhupada would often just sort of say things to me, not because I asked him, because they're things he kind of wanted to share. He sort of trusted I would understand what he meant. And so he said, almost apologetically, he said, when one goes out to preach, sometimes, a person has to act like a kshatriya, like sort of like a warrior. And he was saying almost like, so if sometimes you see me sort of taking very heavy positions on things. And so to me, Prabhupada saying in the Bhagavad Gita, forget everything else. It's kind of like my mom telling me when I was a little kid, don't take candy from strangers. And so, now I do actually go to the store and probably, much more than I should buy candy. But the idea is that Prabhupada saw that because we came from a Western background, and not only that, because some people born in the West are really great souls, but he saw how vulnerable we were. And because he really loved us and he was really trying to save us, he really loved us as his spiritual children. And he was afraid that we would get misled by something. And so it's like, for example, let's say you're climbing a mountain, and let's say you're climbing up to a peak, which is say 6,000 feet up. That's obviously more the Western United States. So let's say you're going to a peak that's maybe 6,000 or 7,000 feet up, and let's say you're 3,000 feet up. So when you're on the way up, you look back and wow, you can see forever, and you're 3,000 feet up. So it's a great achievement. But if you're, let's say, 5,000 feet up and you suddenly fall to the 3,000 foot place, you won't survive it. And so Prabhupada had lifted us up to this very high spiritual position, but we were young and very inexperienced. And he was really afraid of so those passages in the Gita, I mean, obviously, let's say, for example, for someone that never really thought about things. I remember when I was a kid, in school, public school, and you could literally go years without having what we used to call back then a deep conversation. Sometimes I still remember Judy Kay. Judy Kay lived on my street, and she was a really nice girl. And I remember when I was about 15, I was just, we were friends, and so I just dropped into her house. And we had a deep conversation. It's like, wow, because it's been years since I had a deep conversation. So for someone, let's say, who's just sort of caught in ordinary material life, let's say to become a mental speculator, to use Prabhupada's word, it's kind of progress. Like, hey, you're thinking, you're actually thinking about things. You're becoming a little philosophical about life. And so for someone ascending, that same position can be progress, but if you've gone to a higher point and then you slide down the mountain, it can be a bad thing. So I think Prabhupada was just trying to protect us. And obviously in his, let's say, when he was in a mood of just being sort of giving detached philosophy, he would of course acknowledge that to even begin to inquire, to think about what it all means, or to take up some kind of yoga practice, some kind of meditation, is progress. And Prabhupada knew that. So with Prabhupada tended to be, it's like whatever he was saying at the moment, he would just sort of, give it all it's got, he'd give it all he's got. And so Prabhupada, you'll find very strong statements from Prabhupada, which taken on the face of it, what they sort of call in philosophy, the surface grammar of the statement, it looks like Prabhupada is really jumping with spiked boots, on some other process. But then what you have to do with Prabhupada is you have to look at everything he says on a topic. It's not all in the same place. It's sort of scattered throughout his literature. But if you know Prabhupada well, and if you know his teachings well, then, and if you look at everything he says on a certain topic, it's very balanced, and it's probably kind of the way you look at it. So Prabhupada, he was like, he's an orator because he was trying to save a planet, and it's so he tended to make categorical statements like anyone who does this is a so-and-so, but if you look at his teachings, he knows that that's just true in certain cases, but he'll sometimes state it categorically. And he kind of trusted our intelligence, like, so let's say Prabhupada makes a categorical statement, like anyone who is not Krishna conscious is, a this or that. And so you can say, wow, that is really tough love. That's kind of fanatical. But then again, Prabhupada kind of assumed that, well, if you read my books, you'll know that in many other places I give the other side of it. And so it's not like a textbook where, okay, in this chapter, I'm going to tell you everything I ever wanted to tell you about this topic or about philosophy. It's just kind of all over the place. And so in a sense, I see my duty to Prabhupada and to you, because you strike me as a very sincere, thoughtful person. And so I'm happy that I can try to clear that up. And I think that's what Prabhupada would have expected me to do. Go team. That's what we need in this ISKCON. We need cheerleaders. So any other question? So Leslie, did that address all your concerns? Please continue if there's something that I didn't address.
I appreciate you asking. Thank you so much. And yes, it did. I have always wanted to dress up in a mascot costume. So sign me up. I don't know what you'll end up putting me in the costume, but I can do all kinds of flips and stuff.
Really?
Ish.
Oh, I won't ask you to do it like right on camera right now, but that's funny. When we started Krishna West, I used, I think I made one of our logos. It was like sort of silver and powder blue because those are the UCLA colors. You and I grew up in LA, so we'll figure something out. So any other questions?
Just a quick note before Victoria here has her hand up. Maybe
Yes.
at some point, Maharaj, if you could also just tell us all a little bit about Krishna West as well, and just how we can learn a little bit more from you in various other circumstances, Facebook, Krishna West.
Okay.
At some point that I think that would be really helpful for all of us.
Yeah, it's interesting, like my own writing style, I like to say things in as few words as possible. I really like concision. So Krishna West just seemed like the simplest way to say something. And okay, I'll explain it this way. In any spiritual culture or tradition or religion, hopefully you have certain basic principles, like a basic teaching. But then inevitably when human beings express devotion, they necessarily do that unless they're like totally introspective, but almost everyone expresses devotion through external behavior. For example, by singing. So you find in religions all around the world, people sing, and people do art, or they cook. There's because what's a sacred festival without gorging yourself? So the fact is that there's no such thing as music in general. I mean, it's a valid category. We know, if I say, well, music in general, we know what those words mean. But when you actually go to make music, there's only specific music. For example, I really somehow or other, I literally resonated, I mean, the literal sense of the word, with Baroque music. And I won't go into my whole spiel on why I think the Baroque was the best period in Western classical music. Actually, I will. I mean, it was actually the last really God-centered moment in European history before the Industrial Revolution and secularism kind of swept over everything and totally desacralized the world, I think. And the result is what you're seeing nowadays. So anyway, I mean, the great Baroque composers are people like Bach, Handel, Vivaldi, who was a Jesuit priest, actually, with bright red hair, as Italian guy. But anyway, so the Baroque is roughly from 1600 to about 1750. It didn't start on a dime, didn't stop on a dime, but that's roughly it. And I agree with Beethoven, actually, that the greatest Baroque composer was Handel. Handel, who was a rock star on the London stage. He was kind of like the Beatles of his time. And he wrote Hallelujah and all that. So why was I mentioning that? Oh, so I found that, for example, I mean, this is just me, and this is not objective. I'm not telling you an objective truth. I'm just telling you about me. That when I do music for Krishna, I found that when I accompany myself on the keyboard, and I do more kind of like, I don't know, you'd call it Vedic Baroque or something. When I did that, it really, because that's just me musically, and I can chant for hours and hours. And again, this is just me. I'm not telling you you should do it, but when I play Indian musical instruments, my attention span radically reduces. And I'm not saying one is better. I'm not saying, everyone should just choose what they like, but that's just me personally. And so I was born not only in the West, in the far West, I'm from the West Coast. And so when I was a new devotee, I was a very enthusiastic Kool-Aid drinker. I mean, I just kind of embraced the whole package. It was a package deal. And I dressed in the clothes, and I did all that. And I was just young, and it was also a package deal. I mean, I had no choice, but then I learned to like it. What was that famous movie, How I Learned to Love the Bomb? Because it's like let's say, for example, let's say you go to the store and you want to buy a peach. Although nowadays you can't get good peaches. But anyway, let's say you go to the store and you want to buy a peach. And let's say they only sell them in these little packages of 5 peaches. And you can't break open the package. So if you want a peach, you buy 5 peaches. If you want to buy a marker pen, but they only sell, because no one buys marker pens anymore, so they make you buy several of them to stay in business. So you can't buy a marker pen, you got to buy a package of, 5 or 6 or 4. So, it's a package deal. So when I joined the Hare Krishna movement, it was a package deal. You want to save your soul, you want to understand God. Okay, here are your clothes. And, it's just like, it was a package deal. So I thought, okay, I didn't want to do it, but I want to save my soul. Okay, so I did it. But then as I became older, different things happened in my life. And I got to a point where I thought, various things happened. I won't torture you with all the details of my life. It's like that movie Airplane, that really funny movie Airplane, where one guy in the plane keeps driving passengers to suicide by telling them his life story. So I'm not going to do that. But anyway, so at a certain point, for various reasons, I thought I'm just going to be myself. And so and this is just me. I just got to a point where when I walked out of my house and walked on the street, I didn't want people staring at me. I just didn't want that kind of attention. I mean, I wanted people to hear from me about Krishna. Nothing would make me happier than to have the opportunity to speak to all these people, but I didn't want that kind of attention. And again, that's me. People are different. They have different psychologies. And I think it's fair to say that most people, not everyone, I'm not saying one group is better, but most people kind of don't want to draw that kind of attention. Some people do. And so I decided I just wanted to dress normally. I wanted to, and also in terms of bhakti yoga practice, in terms of all the things you hear, because when you're in a religious movement, sometimes philosophy gets mixed with superstition, and India is one of the world centers of, superstition. And so there are all these things going around, sort of like, all the urban legends in the Hare Krishna movement. And so what I did was I started this drive, if you'd call it, years ago, about 20 years ago, I can't remember. But I started asking a simple question: what is Vedic? Because you hear like, this is Vedic, like Vedic food, Vedic dress, Vedic ping pong paddles. I mean, for everything, there's a special Vedic version of everything. So I began to ask the question, what is really Vedic? And I started studying history. I started, because I know Sanskrit, so I went back to our books like Bhagavatam and Gita, and what does the Sanskrit really say? And what I found is that there was a heap of stuff in terms of external culture, dress, cuisine, musical style, architecture, et cetera, which everyone was calling Vedic, like Vedic music and Vedic architecture and Vedic this and Vedic that. But actually, I fact-checked that and found that almost none of it was Vedic, in the sense that if you study the Sanskrit, the great sages who speak in the Bhagavatam or Krishna in the Gita, there's no evidence that they could care less what kind of clothes you wear. And so, of course, decent. I mean, there's a difference between cultural principles and ethnic details. I learned from my parents, thank God, when I was growing up, that when you go to a house of God, you dress respectfully. So when we would go for, holy days to our family religion, a place, we would dress up nicely. The men, the women would dress up because you're going to a house of God and you show respect. So that's, to me, a cultural principle. To say you should wear a sari, oh my God, there are no pockets in saris. I mean, how can you force women to put on something that doesn't have pockets? Anyway, so let's say you're going to and the dhoti, my God. Some people say that, you look beautiful in a sari. No one ever told me I look handsome in a dhoti. Never. So to say that, for example, you should wear a dhoti or a sari, that's an ethnic detail. It's not a cultural principle. The cultural principle is be respectful. You're going to a house of God, whether it's a church or a synagogue or a mosque. It's a house of God. For example, 3 or 4 years ago, I was in Sydney, Australia, and I arrived a little early for my program because I was coming from a different area. And so I was just kind of hanging out in this neighborhood, and I saw across the street was a mosque. And I thought, why not? Because, my undergraduate degree was in world religions, and I was there with a really very nice young lady who was just a disciple. And so I said, let's go across the street. And so we walked across the street and I walked into the mosque, and they had a library, and I was really interested because I studied that, and I found the study of Islam to be quite interesting, the history. And so it's funny, I always joke with her about this, Kathy. I always joke with her about it because they kind of like mummified her. I mean, they had to wrap her up to make her, fit. And so we joke about that a lot. But anyway, but they were nice, they were nice people. And I looked at their library and I had a nice experience. And so, or take food, for example. I mean, some people say, no, you should only offer to Krishna certain foods which Krishna likes. And, who would have guessed that Krishna was so fond of Turkish food? Because, half the things that are offered in temples as these are the foods Krishna likes actually don't come from India. In fact, a typical sabji, if you know this word, vegetable preparation, would be something like potatoes, tomatoes, chili, always chili. And what's interesting is that none of those foods existed in South Asia when Lord Chaitanya was there. And they all come from the Americas. So I began to ask, like what is really Vedic, food architecture? And then if you look at, when devotees are going to build a temple in the West, if they're going to use Indian architecture, they say, yeah, it's going to be a Vedic temple. What they mean is it's going to be Indian architecture with British, Mughal, and also some indigenous Hindu influences. So I just began to look at all this stuff. And or take music, for example. I mean, some instruments are mentioned in the Shastra, the scriptures, like the tambura or the veena and so on. And we know they use drums and bugles. There were military bands, we know that. But exactly what the musicology was thousands of years ago, we don't really know, for the simple reason that, unlike in the West, which maybe began perhaps in the Renaissance, in India, they didn't write down the score of the music. They didn't write down the score. They didn't write down. So we don't have like music books, like let's say Dwapara Yuga greatest hits. And, we just don't have that. So, and also, so there are two main reasons, actually three reasons. One reason is that they just didn't write it down. The second reason is related to the first. And that is that whereas, let's say in Indian classical music, because in every musical tradition, you'll find there's a classical tradition, people who are more highly trained and the music is more sophisticated. And then you'll have what's called folk music, like village dances and things like that. And of course, they influence each other, like, for example, Chopin or even Brahms. I mean, they wrote like, Hungarian dances and even, who's it? Mozart has a very famous piece, which was kind of influenced by Ottoman music in the Ottoman Empire based in Turkey. And so classical music often has folk influences, but still it's on a different level. And so at a certain point in Western classical music, it became sort of intellectual. I mean, you get Baroque counterpoint. Anyway, too much information. But so they started writing the music down. And of course, when you write it, it sort of reaches a higher level of formality because you write things down, you go back, you correct it, but in India, they didn't. In Indian classical music, they gave greater emphasis to improvisation. Now, this came out very clearly. Here's an anecdote, which I found interesting. About 20 years ago, just a year after George Harrison passed away, they did a concert for George. Some of you may know about that. I know, honk if you love the concert for George. So, I know, I also like it. So, but I found this very interesting from the point of view of musicology. That you got two CDs. I've actually never streamed music in my life. I'm just like, I didn't make that streaming curve. But anyway, so they had two CDs, and one of them was typical, the extra features. And so they showed Ravi Shankara rehearsing the Indian side of the concert, because they had an Indian side and a Western side. And so Ravi Shankar was rehearsing the Indian part of it, but they did have some classically trained Western musicians there, like violin and, things that kind of fit in nicely with Indian classical music. And so at one point, Ravi Shankar got kind of exasperated because the Western musicians, or professional classical musicians, weren't really following what he wanted. And you could see he was kind of, he didn't, throw a hissy fit or anything, but you could see he was a little exasperated. Like, come on, you guys. And, but what I saw something different than he saw, because the Western musicians do not do as much improvisation. They're used to reading music. And in terms of reading music, I'm sure they do it much, much, much better than the Indians. Actually, the style of Western music in which they do a lot of improvisation, kind of like in India, would be rock and roll or jazz, where there is a much greater emphasis on improvisation than there is. Now, in the class, I bet you didn't expect all this musicology. But anyway, I'm going to wrap this up. But on the Western side, if you go back to the Baroque period, and even later periods, they did do a lot of improvisation. For example, my favorite Handel, he was considered to be, he was not considered, he was a genius. And he would sit down at the piano and just people were amazed because he would start with a basic melody line and then just go all over the galaxy with it. And so they did improvise. So the Western musicians, it was the kind of thing, the Indian side is more improvisation. But now, which is a real talent, but then again, they didn't write it down. Like in Indian classical music, they'll give you sort of like a little chord progression or a certain melodic line, and then you take off, almost like in, let's say, a band that's just jamming. But the downside of that is we don't know what music they made ages ago because they didn't write it down. Now, the first thing is, heavily, they didn't write it down. Secondly, emphasis on improvisation. The third point is that around 1,000 years ago, India was conquered by Muslim invaders. And it's hard to exaggerate their brutality and what they did in India, but I won't go there right now. So in those days, you didn't just become like a professional musician, like you put an ad somewhere and then you're a professional. You didn't do that back then. In those days, you had to have a patron. Europe also, like for example, like Bach, someone like Bach or Handel, you had to either have royal patronage, like some noble just paid you to be the court musician and composer, or you worked for the church. So for example, Bach spent a lot of his time as what was called in German, the Kantor, like the music director in the city of Leipzig. And he had a big family, a lot of kids, and that was his job, to compose music. So you had to have either royal patron or be subsidized by the church. Now in India, they didn't have institutional religions. They didn't have, there was no Vatican in India. There was no, these formal churches. And so therefore, you couldn't really be patronized by a church or an institution, and therefore you had to have royal patronage. Now, for the last 700 years, twice as long as America has existed, practically even as a colony, the Muslims ruled India, first the Delhi Sultanate and then the Mughals. And so they gave preference to Muslims. And that's why to this day, a lot of the most important classical musicians in India are Muslims, because they had the patronage and therefore they developed the traditions. And that's why you can listen to Vedic music in India, which sounds remarkably like the music you hear in Saudi Arabia and Baghdad and other places like that. So therefore, you say, what is Vedic music? We don't really know. Some instruments can be identified. They had drums, they had kettle drums, they had bugles or trumpets, they had, they had definitely had like a sitar, a vina, or something like that. But exactly what was a typical chord, what kinds of harmonies, and what kinds of melodies, we just don't know. So therefore, to say something is Vedic music or Vedic architecture or Vedic cuisine or Vedic, so that's my point. Vedic culture, if you want to use that term, is not an ethnic tradition. It's not an ethnic tradition. Last point I'll make, and then I'll stop haranguing you, but if you study cultural transmission from a socio-historical perspective, if you study cultural transmission, what I always say is, so sorry if you've heard this 1,000 times, that culture is like water. It flows down, it doesn't flow up. Hey, Kelly, bon appetit. No, go ahead. No, when you got to eat, you have to eat. Please go for it. So I'm happy to see you. And no, go for it. I'm happy for you. So, we can actually measure. I mean, it's actually possible through social science to measure the level of prestige of different what are called national brands. In other words, what countries have more influential culture? For example, probably the one country that punches way most above its weight in terms of international influence is England. You think about it, it's not such a big country. I mean, just think, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and 1,000 other musicians, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, royal weddings, that real world stoppers, So culturally, England punches way above its weight in terms of cultural influence in the world. Movies, Jane Austen, woo. So, I'm a big, so anyway, that's my writing guru, Jane Austen. So it punches way above its weight. Other countries, like let's say Russia, have remarkably little cultural influence. And where are you from, Banu?
I'm born in Bosnia, former Yugoslavia. Yeah, but I live in Germany.
Oh, Sie spricht Deutsch. Du sprichst Deutsch. Du sprichst Deutsch. Ja, ich kann ein bisschen. So, and then again, like Russia, and this is not to put down Russia, there's a lot of great people in Russia, but I mean, when's the last time lots of people in America went to a Russian movie, or lots of people anywhere outside of Russia and maybe Belarus, went to a Russian movie? So, or, Russian rock stars or Russian movies. So, I mean, there's historical reasons for all that. There are a lot of great people in Russia, but so the point here is that you can measure the cultural influence, the status of the Indian brand. And it's not a great brand. I mean, yoga, of course, but what's interesting, for example, in Los Angeles, where I'm from, they have so much yoga there and everything. I mean, literally, when people still use telephone books, dating myself, in LA, they had a telephone book, that thick, a telephone book just for New Age and yoga programs. They have their own telephone book. And what's interesting is that in LA, a lot of the sort of like the rock star yoga teachers were people who had studied with Iyengar, who, by the way, was a good friend of the devotees. And he was a devotee of Krishna, actually, Iyengar. But anyway, so most of the famous, South Indian Vaishnava family. So all the rock star gurus in LA or most of them had studied with Iyengar. But they kind of I'm sorry, some people have their hands up. But I'll call on you in a second. There is an off switch on me. So what's interesting is that these Iyengar trained yoga teachers were just, to use the vulgar expression, cleaning up. They were really doing well. But then they had one sort of purist Iyengar center where, no, we're not adopting it to the West. It's just kind of like unfiltered, straight Iyengar yoga. And what's interesting is that place didn't do that well. They were, instead of being in Santa Monica or Hollywood or Beverly Hills or, or here or there, they were kind of in, I mean, it wasn't a horrible location, but it was definitely not A-class. And they didn't have that many people. But it was kind of like the Iyengar, which was adopted for Western consumption. For example, Westernized yoga is more athletic than Indian yoga. And it's, there are differences. And so the fact is that culture, I don't know a single case in the history of the world where someone brought a spiritual idea or process to another culture and insisted on preserving the ethnicity of the homeland that ethnic tradition was not considered more or as sort of prestigious status as the culture to which it migrated. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And as I said, there's no such thing as general music. You have to do a certain kind of music. So Indian music is just Indian music. And so when people in India wanted to express their devotion, they did it with the music that was their music. Or if they wanted to say priestly dress, like how does a priest dress or a priestess? Well, that was their culture. Or what kind of foods do you cook? Or architecture. And so it's not, what's sacred is the name of God in any language, really. The name of God is sacred. Souls are sacred. Knowledge, there's sacred knowledge. But ethnicity, it's just the way people in a particular country express themselves because that was their culture. And there are all kinds, India, it's not that it preserved this pure culture because there were many invasions. There was, from the Scythians, from the Kushans, and Central Asia, the Muslim invasions, there are all kinds of cultural influences coming in. And even if you go back to the Mahabharata, when Yudhishthira was performing his Rajasuya sacrifice, and the Mahabharata is describing all the kings that came from many foreign lands bringing tribute and gifts. And what's interesting, just like now, it was obvious that people back then really appreciated imported items, which I find kind of ironic. And so Krishna West is basically saying, give us all your money. No, Krishna West is saying that let's present the spiritual essence of Krishna consciousness, the knowledge, the essential practice, and let people, for God's sake, keep their pants on. That's an essential. That's Krishna West. Or, for example, another example, I will redeem my promise to reply to the hands raised, but just give one more example. If you look at, let's say, India 500 years ago, around the time of Lord Chaitanya, or if you look at India 1,000 years ago, around the time of, Madhva, Ramanuja, or even a little earlier, Shankara, and so on. If you look at the intellectual history of India, what you find is, or the intellectual history of, I don't know, Hungary or anywhere, China. If you look at intellectual history, what you find is that at different times and different centuries, people have different issues. They argue about different things. Because when you're going to debate with someone, you have to agree on enough to have a debate. If you can't even agree on what language you're going to speak, there's not going to be a debate. You have to agree on language. You have to agree on, okay, both sides are willing to assume that certain things are true. Like just to give an example, there's been a raging debate forever about interpretation of the Constitution of the United States. And there are some people who are strict constructionists who think that we have to find what the original intention was of the authors and they wrote what they meant, and what they meant is the Constitution. Other people said, no, actually the Constitution has to be a flexible document that adapts to changing views and everything. And so they debate these things, but they agree on the fact that it's about the Constitution. So like in a law court, you have to agree on what you're arguing about. If you can't agree on anything, you can't really talk to each other. So if you look in history, certain things which are really big issues for us, no one cared about during Lord Chaitanya's time. And certain things that people desperately cared about when Lord Chaitanya was there, no one cares about now. And so therefore, it's a question of addressing people in their language, in their cultural language. And then some people, inevitably, some wise guy in the crowd, if I say you don't have to wear Indian clothes, they'll say, well, does that mean women should go to the temple in bikinis and men should go in some kind of super inappropriate dress? And I say no, because Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita teaches us that we should live in the mode of goodness. It's not. Now, there were times when bikinis were considered perfectly conservative and respectable, especially in tropical countries where it's very hot. So again, shifting, for example, if you look at European history, there were times when we see this clearly in European art, that a woman's chest was not considered so erotic, but her ankles were, or her neck was. There's this one famous novel in the 1700s, I forget the famous author, but there's this boy and the girl, who eventually, they're in love and eventually to get married. And they're having this adventure and escaping from something. And at one point they tumbled down a hill. And in the act of tumbling down the hill, her neck cover was somehow fell off. And the guy is just kind of like, whoa, because he's seeing, oh my God, I'm seeing her neck. And for us, it's like, and you're seeing her neck, and what's your problem? Like, why are you so agitated? So therefore, you can look at pictures of paintings of queens, European queens, with these really plunging necklines because a woman's, bust was maternal, or it wasn't really erotic, but her neck is covered. Elizabethan periods like that. So my point is, what does it mean to dress chastely? What does it mean to dress inappropriately? It moves around culturally. And so in our period, if you accept as the general rule, you should live in the mode of goodness. So how should a man or woman dress so that it's appropriate for entering the house of God? And by appropriate, I mean, you're not going to actually sabotage other souls by taking their attention away from God and putting their attention on your body. Because, the real truth about this is your body, like everyone else's body, is going to die. And so if you want to get people to focus on your body, you're just leading them to death. Whereas if you get them to focus on God, you're really being a friend. That's real love. And so a man or a woman, when to dress in a way that does not distract people from their own salvation, from their own God consciousness, that's love. When a woman or a man dresses appropriately, they're showing love for other souls. Because what could be more selfish? Say, well, you may lose your chance of liberation, but at least I got some attention from my body. Which to me is really, the opposite of friendship, the opposite of love, the opposite of everything. So that's Krishna West. And that's Krishna West. And let's see, Sarah.
I think Vicky was first. I'll let Vicky go first.
You guys, if you want to just go off camera and sort of duke it out for a minute and decide who goes. I'm just kidding. It's a joke. Okay, so either of you, please, I'm at your service.
Okay, I guess I'll go. She just totally waved me out. Okay, so I feel like I had so much to ask, and now I'm kind of feel like I'm all over the place. But first, I want to thank you so much. You're hilarious, and you make everything, no, for real, you make everything so much more palatable, and interesting and exciting. So thank you so much for that. I really appreciate hearing your words. I wanted to know, since your interest started in world religion, so this is kind of maybe a long question, sorry.
No, go ahead. I mean, look how long I spoke.
I guess I'm just interested in, like, if you have like interfaith dialogues ever, and like I grew up Jewish, so I'm gonna just put it out there, and like knowing that, like, and I was Shomer Shabbos for a long time, so I was really like pretty into the religion, and I feel like if I were to talk to a rabbi, they would say, well, Judaism is the oldest religion. Why? How do you think that Krishna is God over our God, Hashem, or whatever? And I guess I would love to understand how you would approach this interfaith dialogue. So
Great question. I'm just going to open a window, let a little air in here.
Okay.
Now it's California. It's one of those rough winters. It's kind of trying to deal with the 72-degree weather. So, sorry, that was cruel. That's typical obnoxious thing people in California.
Yeah, I'm totally in Detroit, so thanks for that.
Yeah. So first of all, it's interesting, Hashem, which in Hebrew means the name. And one thing I just wanted to mention to you about Judaism is that there's no injunction in the 10 Commandments or anywhere else that you can't say the name of God. That was something they invented. What the 10 Commandments do say is not to take the Lord's name in vain, like, GD something. And so, but they were sort of like, an abundance of caution. Let's not even say the name, which I think was really a big mistake. And I was also born in a Jewish family. And so at my mother's funeral, which, I had a great mother, and I chose to speak on, I looked at a translation of the Cottage Prayer, Viskadal, Viskadash, Shemei Rava, and all that. Beautiful song. And what's always been noted about that prayer you say when you're mourning for the departed, it's always been noted that it says nothing about death. It says nothing about the departed. It actually focuses on two themes, which are, number one, the power of the name of God. The power of the name of God. And number two, that this knowledge, this revelation, which came to be called Judaism, is actually meant for the whole world. It's meant for all the people of the world. And so I spoke on those themes. Another thing about the name of God, it's funny because my nephew's bar mitzvah, I was given to recite, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. Blessed is the holy name of God forever and ever. I thought that's appropriate for Hare Krishna. So, but also when Solomon built his temple, the first temple in Jerusalem, I once did a paper on this actually. It said over and over again in the Old Testament that the temple was built as a temple to the name of God. And that just as God lives in heaven, he lives through his name in the temple. So the name of God as God himself is right there in the Old Testament. But now, as far as what to say to those of little faith in Bhakti Yoga, because I've done a lot of teaching in Israel. We have a super Krishna West program, actually a program. There's an amazing community in Israel. It's one of the best communities. And I love it. I love to go there, and I love the Israeli devotees. But by the way, Israel has the highest per capita rate of vegans in the world of any country. So this is what I basically tell them in Israel. That if you look, what's interesting to me, ultimately, is not diaspora Judaism. In other words, when the people in Israel had this incredibly astute idea of attacking the Roman Empire, and twice, and then finally they were just basically kicked out of Israel, and a few people came back. But so this civilization, which was based in Israel, became a diaspora culture. They lived everywhere but Israel. And some people always did. There were always Jews in Israel throughout history, and so because they were always living in places where they were a small minority, and because they tended to do well for whatever reason, they were always subject to periodic persecution, whether it was the Inquisition in Spain, whether it was in, in Poland and Russia and Germany. And so that was kind of their life, to be, a minority, which sometimes would do very well, and then periodically would be persecuted, massacred. And this went on for a very long time, and for many, many, many centuries. So anyway, I mean, in response to this, to being a minority, they kind of circled the wagons, and they developed what is called Rabbinic Judaism, which is based on reading the Talmud and then interpreting it, the purports, thus end the Rabbi Shlomo purports to the anyway. So, but my point is, and what I'm telling you now is absolutely mainstream scholarship. This is, if you take a class on ancient Judaism at any good university, you'll hear this. This is not, something I found on some, exotic conspiracy website. So, and that is that when Judaism was in Israel, it was much more diverse than it later became. There were many kinds of Judaism. I mean, they were all Jews, but for example, probably the main ones were, there was Judaism centered on the temple in Jerusalem, especially the big holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, when basically, the Jews in Israel would all go to the temple, they would make an offering to try to free themselves from their sins. And so the people in charge of the temple were the Sadducees. The Sadducees tended to be the wealthy class. They had money, and because they were wealthy, they were conservative. No big surprise there. And they tended to have very cozy relationships with the Romans, because when everything's going great for you, there's nothing like the status quo. And so because they were conservative, and they were, they did collaborate with the Romans, and they were in charge of the temple in Jerusalem. Therefore, there were other Jews that despised them, that thought the temple was corrupt. You have that famous story in the New Testament, throwing out the money changers. And so there was another group who felt that Jerusalem, even though it's a city of David, it's become corrupt, and therefore, let's get out of here. Now, what's interesting is you find that in every religion. For example, in India, the people that felt that way, the cities are corrupt, the kings are corrupt, they went to the Himalayan mountains, or they went to the deep forest. In fact, there's a class of Vedic literature. You have the 4 Vedas, and then the Brahmana interpretive literature, and then you have a literature category called the Aranyakas, from the word Aranya, which means forest, like Naimisharanya or Vrindaranya. And so they were people who felt the cities were too materialistic, and so they went to the deep forest, in Sanskrit, Mahavana, the great forest, or they went to the mountains. And in other places, I mean, throughout the world, you'll find people who are kind of yogis, meditators. For example, in early Christianity, before Constantine basically destroyed it by adopting it and merging it into the Roman political apparatus. So pre-Constantine Christianity was very diverse. It wasn't like the credo. In fact, the canon, the New Testament, as the collection of authorized books about Jesus, was not formally adopted until hundreds of years after Jesus. Over 300 years after Jesus. And before that, there were all kinds of gospels. But interestingly, early Christians, pre-Constantine, pre-Roman Church rules, everybody else drools, before that, if you were a follower of Jesus and you thought too much corruption in the cities, the Roman bishop and everything, and you wanted to get away and kind of be a Christian yogi, you went to Upper Egypt, among other places. Now, Upper Egypt is actually southern Egypt, because, Egypt, where most people live, the big cities, Cairo and everything, it's kind of it's just sort of flat lands. But then as you keep going south along the Nile, the land starts to rise. You get into mountains, hills and mountains, as you go toward the source of the Nile. And that was, so southern Egypt was kind of like the Himalayan retreat for Christian yogis. And so they would go into Upper Egypt, and they had their own gospels and everything. And so what I mean to say, getting back to Israel now, is that if you were in Israel in ancient times and you wanted to do the equivalent of Upper Egypt or Himalayan mountains or deep forest, like, where do you go? It's a very tiny country. So the one place you could go to really get away, the one place you could sort of call wilderness, was by the Dead Sea, because it's very low, and the summer is, the devil would probably, beg to leave there. So they went to the Dead Sea, and they're the people that wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. They were the ancient Jewish yogis. They wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls. They had ashrams, and also called the Essenes. And of course, many people believe that Jesus was really connected with those people. But in any case, so there were the Sadducees, there were the Essenes, there was another major group that is always sort of interacting with Jesus, and they're called the Pharisees. And the Pharisees are kind of like the proto-rabbis. And the Pharisees, of course, one thing that scholars always say, I'm not going to charge you extra, by the way, for all this history. This is included in your base price. So in the New Testament, Jesus, the Pharisees are always the foils for Jesus. Like, they always say the dumb things, and Jesus says the real clever thing. Like, Jesus, you're not following the Sabbath. Aha, gotcha moment. The Sabbath is made for man. Man is not made for the Sabbath. Or according to the law, because the Pharisees it was like the covenant, like you worship God and you go back to God by strict observance of the law found in Deuteronomy and forget the other, those other books, Leviticus, which is supposed to be the Mosaic law that Moses himself, after he brought the Hebrew slaves out of Egypt in that, the great liberation story, he went to Mount Sinai and he brought down the 10 Commandments, which were only that was just like Jewish law for dummies. He actually brought down all kinds of laws. And so, strict observance of those laws is the covenant, because the word covenant means a contract. So the Jewish people agree to follow God's laws, and in return, he accepts them as his people. And so the angle of the Jesus movement, because it wasn't Christianity, the followers of Jesus didn't think of themselves as a separate religion until much after Jesus. Even at the time of Paul, they thought they were just reforming Judaism. So, and so Jesus was kind of saying, well, anyway, I won't get into all the deals. So the point here, though, is that, the Pharisees always run to Jesus and they're trying to say, you didn't follow this law, you didn't observe the Sabbath. Or another gotcha moment is when some young guy wants to join the Jesus movement, like join the Hare Krishna movement. And so he says, okay, I'm going to move into the temple soon, but there are actually no temples, but I'm going to move into the community, but my father died and I have to bury him. This is a patriarchal society. I know patriarchy is probably one of the most popular concepts nowadays. And so it was a patriarchy. And so burying your father was that was huge. So Jesus, kind of speaking like a young Hare Krishna, sort of zealous, he says, let the dead bury the dead, come with me. It's like, seriously, you're not going to bury your father? And so there's all kinds of things. Those are the Pharisees. Now, one thing that academic historians will all tell you is that it's very dangerous to learn about a group of people by hearing from their enemies. And so if all you know about the Pharisees is what you hear from their opponents, that's not necessarily a trustworthy picture. And they weren't necessarily, as idiotic as they're portrayed in the New Testament. But in any case, there were the Pharisees. There were people like Jesus, who was a Jew. He's addressed in the New Testament as rabbi. And he wasn't the only one. There was, what's his name? Apollo of Apollonius. What's his name? Someone of Apollonius. He was someone that preached that, I've come as the Son of God, and I've died, and I will have to suffer and die for your sins, but my death will purify you of your sins. And it was someone else. So what's interesting is that whole story of being the Son of God and dying for the sins of the world and then rising back to sit with God, that came from Egypt. That was like a very well-known Egyptian religion. And Israel at the time, they were actually kind of you couldn't really tell your saviors without a scorecard. I'm not making fun of Jesus. I think Jesus was a really admirable, devotee. But anyway, I can't get into the whole history now. I could, but about how the huge demographic shift in the Jesus movement defined Christianity, because Jesus only preached to Jews, actually, according to the New Testament. But then after the crucifixion, the Jews for various reasons, because Messiah was a political military term, which meant the person that would save the Jews from, like David or Judas Maccabee, from Roman occupation. And so then the movement became a pagan movement. There was this huge demographic shift. And within a generation or two, a movement which had been composed exclusively of Jews was composed almost exclusively of pagans who brought all kinds of pagan ideas. And those pagan ideas were shaped into what became Christianity. But in any case, and this is nothing against Jesus. I think Jesus was really great. But what I mean to say is, if you look at ancient Israel, it was very diverse. There are many different ways that you could be Jewish. And so what I don't want to say preaching, we don't use the P word anymore, but the case I was making in Israel is that I really like Judaism. I'm not rejecting Judaism, but I want Israeli Judaism, not diaspora Judaism, because the diaspora is over. In the sense, the Jews went back to Israel. So why can't we go back to Israeli Judaism, where you have choices? And there's many different ways that you can approach God through Judaism. And so I can just say also, because I think I was kind of born sort of with a certain spiritual inclination. And so when I went to Hebrew school, when I was 12 years old, I was kind of appointed by all the teachers and rabbis. I was actually leading the holy service, the Jewish mass, for like 200 kids when I was 12 years old by myself. And they asked me to do it. And I was just the one that knew it the best and loved it the most and everything. And so that idea that you love God with all your heart, soul, and might, I felt I was doing that. What I say is, I didn't join the Hare Krishna movement. Oh my God, I joined the Hare Krishna. Anyway, I didn't join. Oh my God, what was I thinking? I didn't join the Hare Krishna movement because I wanted another religion. I already had one. And I actually experienced God. I definitely experienced the presence of God in the synagogue. When I was 9 years old and they enrolled me in the program, we had a beautiful synagogue. It was really beautiful. And when I would walk into the synagogue, I directly perceived in my pre-rational, 9 and 10-year-old body, I definitely knew that this is a holy place and God lives here in this sanctuary. I knew that. And so to me, that injunction, love God with all your heart, soul, and might, I just took it seriously. And therefore I found the best way to love God with all my heart, soul, and might. And to me, it doesn't mean I'm rejecting anything. That means I'm just building on the foundation I received. So that's the, believe it or not, that's the short version.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Zagazun. So, Vicky.
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Hey, Vicky.
Please accept my humble obeisances.
Where are you from?
I'm from Ukraine, but I live in Cyprus, in small island.
I know Cyprus, of course.
Yes, and we have small Bhakti community here. we are only 1 year together. We just created this yatra. So we are very new to Bhakti as well. And I started practicing Bhakti from books. I didn't know the devotees. And my journey started also from documentary about Prabhupada and Prabhupada Lilamrita. And I felt like he's my grandfather, and he took my hand and he was with me in the most difficult period of my life. And I had I wished I lived when Prabhupada lived at that time, and I had a dream to meet a devotee who knew him, who had the opportunity to serve him. And today my dream came true, and I just wanted to express gratitude to you, yes, for this that you shared with us how it was to be with Prabhupada. And if you can share more, I will be very grateful.
Thank you.
Jai Prabhupada.
It's a pleasure to meet you. Do you know Sri Prahlad?
Yes, he's the leader of our community.
Yeah,
so
my disciple, Sri Prahlad.
Wow.
Yeah, he's a great devotee.
Yes. He's my teacher, and we had a Bhakti community meeting today in the morning, and we plan lots of kirtan meetings here in Cyprus.
That's wonderful. Okay, you're such a nice young lady, so I'll tell you some Prabhupada stories. Actually, okay, I want to explain how, in a real way, not just sort of sentimental, make her feel good, but in a real way, how you have a privileged understanding and view of Prabhupada. And so I'll start with an example, and then I'll go to my own experience with Prabhupada. That when you drive, let's say, east through the Rocky Mountains, through Colorado, and it's actually, to be honest, I mean, people in Colorado won't be happy to hear this, but it's actually not that scenic, because the road is so high. At least on the main interstate that goes to Denver, the road is so high that it kind of looks like you're driving through hills, but the road is actually, thousands of meters up. And so, but then when you come to Denver, and then you just keep driving, if you go, let's say, like, drive 10 miles east of Denver, and then you stop and turn around and look, that's when your jaw drops. Because that's when you see how big the mountains really are. And so, okay, tough love here. To be honest, like, when I sometimes listen to, like, Prabhupada's Vyas Puja ceremonies where all his disciples are talking, and one thing that kind of strikes me, and I mean, they're great souls, but one thing that kind of is that they always seem to tell Prabhupada anecdotes. Yeah, one time, Prabhupada came and he looked at me, and I could just tell by the way he looked at me. And I mean, that's all wonderful and it's all nice. However, when you were with Prabhupada, his mood was kind of like, okay, it's not just about all these anecdotes, it's about service. It's about understanding what I'm teaching you. And so one time in 1972, well, first I'll go back. The day when I went to LA to be initiated, I joined the movement in Berkeley, California. I went to the temple in LA, but I knew if I joined in LA, my parents, my family, it's going to be World War III. And so I was a student, so I went to Berkeley, and I joined there, and I'd seen Prabhupada once before. He gave a lecture at Berkeley, actually. He gave a lecture at Berkeley, which really, but he just came in and gave a lecture, and then he left. So in Berkeley, we had a big poster of Prabhupada, and we were worshiping Prabhupada. And Krishna, revealed to me that Prabhupada is seeing me, that actually Prabhupada, he can see God. And so then I went down to Los Angeles to be initiated. And I was so nervous because I couldn't, because I'd had so many realizations of who Prabhupada was, his position, his relationship with Krishna, that I went down to LA. I was like overwhelmed by the idea that I'm going to actually see with my eyes. I'm going to see this pure devotee. And and so then I was already nervous. And then we were standing at the curb in 2 rows, and Prabhupada would drive up. ISKCON was so young then. Prabhupada in his world headquarters, his official car was like a little Volkswagen Beetle. That was the official guru car. And I didn't know it at the time, but Prabhupada was living at that time just a few blocks from me, because my family lived in Beverly Hills, in a certain part of Beverly Hills, and Prabhupada, they'd rented Prabhupada a house there. So just a few blocks away, and I never knew it. So anyway, so Prabhupada was going to drive up in the car, and then the devotee rushed up to me, the president, said, "Here, put this on Prabhupada as a flower garland." And when I realized I'm going to put a flower garland on Prabhupada, I almost fell over backwards. I was like 20 years old, and it was just like, I was just overwhelmed. I couldn't believe that, because I knew who Prabhupada was. And so then I was just standing in the corner, so much anxiety. And then the car drove up, and it was in the evening. It was, and so it was, and he drove up right under a street light, so I could see through the window. And Prabhupada was in the front seat, because, you wouldn't want to put your guru in the back seat of a little Volkswagen. So Prabhupada drove up, and I saw him very clearly through the window. And I just instantly thought, oh, it's Prabhupada. I've been seeing him every day. And I realized that by serving him, and that I had been seeing him. And I just had this realization, oh, it's Prabhupada. I was always seeing him. And so, one time in 1972, Prabhupada was in LA, so I was a sannyasi then, take no prisoners, sannyasi. And we were traveling around and, selling books and preaching. We definitely, we were totally into the P word back then. And so Prabhupada came to LA, and so he was giving the morning Bhagavatam class. And I was sitting there at his feet. And then he said, do not try to enjoy the guru, his personal association. He said, we want to serve. And so I got it. I just thought, I got it. So the class ended, I took some breakfast, packed up my van, all the brahmacharis, and off we went to distribute Prabhupada's books. And then one time in 1976, I stayed with Prabhupada for a month in Mayapur. And it was very nice, because there was really no one else there. And so I was talking to Prabhupada a lot every day, and he was confiding in me different things. And we were walking every day, many times in the morning walk. It was just Prabhupada and myself. And so I was really, it was a very happy time. And so then the festival started, Mayapur Festival, and all the devotees came from around the world. And so as the festival was ending, I went into Prabhupada's room one day, and he just said to me, this personal association is not the most important thing. We want to serve. So I just said, and I offered obeisances, walked in, down I went again, hit the floor again, got up, flew back to the West, and did my service. And I remember when I was a brahmachari, we were so, if you want to hear a real cult classic, as I call it, because, we were all young. And I call it sometimes, Vedic Lord of the Flies. So we were all young. I was like 20 years old. And so someone told us, because we didn't have many books back then. There was no digital media. And there were very few Prabhupada classes on tape. But someone said, that Bhaktisiddhanta said that because the mind is so treacherous, the mind is always, trying to take you away from Krishna, that you should, beat your mind with an old shoe 100 times every day. Because, in Asian culture, the shoe is really contaminated. the greatest insult in Asian country, in the Middle East, is to throw your shoe at someone. So we had in the Berkeley Temple, this beautiful little house, sort of, what do you call it? Almost like a Swiss house, but so we had a backyard. So in the backyard, there was this one old tennis shoe, which had lost its mate. So there was one old tennis shoe. So every night before we went to bed, all the brahmacharis would go into the backyard and take turns. Like, okay, like I'd take this tennis shoe, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, we didn't injure ourselves. There was no permanent brain damage. We didn't actually hurt us. We just like, tap your head 100 times with an old shoe. I mean, I have to plead insanity on grounds of youth. But anyway, one time, a letter came from Prabhupada. And that was a big thing when a letter came from Prabhupada to one of the devotees. And Prabhupada said, you're not really seeing the guru. He gave the example that when the wind blows the clouds across the moon, that it looks like the moon is sailing through the clouds, but actually the moon is fixed. Well, not really, and it's actually the clouds that are moving. So he said, you're not seeing the real form of the guru. And what's interesting is I had a lot of god brothers and god sisters who were really attached to Prabhupada's physical presence. And, they tell these stories, they have endless stories. What's interesting is there's hardly one of them that after Prabhupada left, continued up to the present to really actively do service. I mean, Shama Sundar wrote these wonderful books, and that's definitely, serving Prabhupada. But and Prabhupada always said there's Vapu and Vani. Vapu means the body. There's the body of the guru, and there's Vani, which is the message. And Prabhupada always emphasizes, I would say the people who really went on to have sort of powerful careers in spreading Krishna consciousness, they were very attached to Prabhupada's message. And by that attachment, you're really seeing Prabhupada. So, I mean, the personal form is important, and we all love the biographies and everything. So here's my last point about you, Vicky G. Vicky G, that because in terms of material time, you're farther away from Prabhupada. There's a real sense in which I feel you, and really all of you here, because I see that I'm slightly older than all of you. So really all of you, in a sense, have an advantage because you can see Prabhupada in a sense better than we can. It's like you can see the Rocky Mountains or any mountains better at a distance. And so, because if it were a fact that merely being a disciple of Prabhupada, and I don't mean to say we shouldn't honor Prabhupada disciples, and I hope if I come to your temple, I'll still get a lot of free food. But so, apart from etiquette and all that, if it were true that Prabhupada's initiated disciples have a necessarily a better understanding of Prabhupada, it would lead to an absurd conclusion. The absurd conclusion would be that as time passes and there are more and more generations, the Hare Krishna movement is getting farther and farther away from Prabhupada, and the leaders of ISKCON understand Prabhupada less and less and less. And that's absurd because it's obviously not the way the spiritual game works. And so what I'm seeing is that I have disciples who really impress me by their devotion to Prabhupada. And so, it's like in the Guru Puja, we sing Chakudan Dilo Ye. He gave literally the gift of sight. Chakudan Dilo Ye, Janme Janme Prabhu say, Divya Gyan Hriday Prakashita. That in the heart, the spiritual knowledge is revealed. So you in Cyprus, good old Vicky, you actually have, and all of you, I would say all of you have an advantage. In some ways, I feel you can understand Prabhupada, you can see things about Prabhupada that I may not see. Precisely because of your distance, because of your perspective. And therefore, what really must happen, and I think will happen, that every generation will have a greater and greater understanding of Prabhupada. So yeah, that's my answer to your point.
Maharaj, don't mind if I just jump in for a moment. It's like when there's a tsunami-like flow of nectar, it's painful to have to stop it. And I think that
That's nice. No one has ever called my teaching tsunami-like, but I'll take that as a compliment.
yeah, tsunami-like nectar.
Yeah, it's already 12. I understand it. You know, it's as we say in Sanskrit, tat sarvang janaha, which means literally, that's all, folks. So yeah, thank you all very much. I mean, you're all really, really beautiful people. And you will know someday when you get to be my prestigious age, that you get to a certain point in life where the most encouraging thing in the world is to see intelligent young people taking up the baton or whatever. And so for me to see young people who actually are understanding this and are very sincere, it's, I mean, nothing could be more encouraging for me. So thank you all very much.
Well, Maharaj, we're going to send them all the ways in which they can keep listening to you and just keep in touch and keep posted. And you please also let us know if there's something we could do, with some way that we could serve you. And
actually, I would tell you, I'm kind of hungry now, but you're a little too far away. So,
you know, Maharaj, you know, we're still counting down the seconds to be able to feed you properly. So
yeah. Oh, the good news is once this, I think that in the future I'll be traveling a little more. I hope to come to a temple near you. Cyprus, by the way, I mean, you're so close to Israel. So yeah, I hope I'll get to meet you three-dimensionally before too long.
no one wants this to end. You can tell. I mean, this is definitely.
So I guess I'll have to pull the plug here. And yeah, thanks to Nanda Leela, who helps arrange these things. And thank you all very much. It really was a pleasure for me to meet you. And there really is, at my stage in life, as they say, there's really no greater happiness than to see very sincere, intelligent young people who actually get it. So Hare Krishna.